Today's question is, did psychedelic plants shape our consciousness? Today I want to talk about a really fascinating lecture by Terence McKenna called The Ethnobotany of Shamanism. If you're interested in anthropology, consciousness, psychedelics, or the origins of spirituality, this talk is extremely interesting because it connects all of those topics in a way that most academic discussions usually avoid. Terence McKenna was an ethnobotanist and a thinker who spent a lot of his life studying the relationship between humans and psychoactive plants. Ethnobotany, in simple terms, is the study of how different cultures interact with plants. That can include things like medicinal plants, ritual plants, food crops, or plants used in traditional healing systems. But McKenna was particularly interested in plants that alter consciousness. In this lecture, which was given in 1988 at the California Institute of Integral Studies, McKenna explores the idea that psychedelic plants may have played a major role in the development of shamanism and early religious traditions. This is obviously a controversial idea, but McKenna approaches it from an anthropological perspective rather than simply a recreational or counterculture perspective. One of the first things he talks about is the importance of understanding psychedelics in a serious and informed way. He emphasizes that this is not just some casual topic. In fact, he points out that the study of psychoactive plants intersects with pharmacology and physiology. In other words, these substances interact with the body and the brain in very real and sometimes very powerful ways, so they shouldn't be approached carelessly. This is one reason why traditional cultures usually surrounded these plants with rituals, guidance from shamans, and strict rules about how they were used. McKenna also briefly talks about how he personally became interested in these subjects. He describes himself as someone who always had a fascination with strange and unusual things. As a child, he was interested in nature, collecting rocks, fossils, insects, and anything that seemed mysterious or unusual. Later on, he became deeply influenced by science fiction and philosophy. Science fiction, in particular, encouraged him to imagine possibilities beyond ordinary reality, and that curiosity eventually led him toward studying altered states of consciousness and psychedelic experiences. One of the central questions McKenna raises in this lecture is whether psychedelics were actually essential to shamanism. In anthropology, there has been a long debate about this topic. Some scholars believe that psychedelic plants were central to shamanic traditions and may even have been the original source of visionary religious experiences. Others argue that shamanism developed through different methods like fasting, intense drumming, physical ordeals, or prolonged meditation. For example, some cultures use repetitive drumming rhythms to push the brain into trance states. Others use fasting, sleep deprivation, or physical challenges that force the mind into altered states of perception. These methods can certainly produce powerful psychological experiences, but McKenna argues that psychoactive plants may have been the earliest and most direct way humans discovered altered states of consciousness. From his perspective, shamans were essentially explorers of the mind. They were the first people in human history who deliberately entered altered states of consciousness in order to gain knowledge, healing abilities, or spiritual insight. In many cultures, these experiences were not seen as hallucinations. Instead, they were interpreted as journeys into other realms of reality. McKenna gives several examples of psychoactive plants used in traditional cultures. One of the most well-known is peyote, a small cactus that has been used for centuries in Native American spiritual practices. Another example is ayahuasca, a powerful visionary brew used by shamans throughout the Amazon basin. There are also psilocybin mushrooms, which were used in religious ceremonies in ancient Mesoamerica long before European contact. What is interesting is that these plants were rarely used casually in traditional cultures. They were usually part of structured rituals guided by experienced practitioners. The shaman's role was not just to consume the plant, but to guide the experience, interpret visions, and help people integrate what they encountered during the altered state. Another fascinating topic McKenna discusses is the strange consistency of certain visionary experiences. People who take particular psychedelic plants often report seeing very specific symbolic imagery. For example, people who drink ayahuasca frequently describe encountering jaguars, serpents, dense jungle landscapes, and complex geometric patterns. Even people who have never studied Amazonian mythology sometimes report the same kinds of imagery. McKenna found this extremely mysterious. Why would people from completely different cultures see the same symbolic themes during these experiences? One possibility he discusses is that psychedelic plants may activate deeper layers of the human psyche. Carl Jung proposed the idea of a collective unconscious, a shared psychological layer containing universal archetypes. McKenna speculated that these visionary plants might provide access to something similar. In many indigenous traditions, psychedelic plants are not considered drugs in the modern sense. Instead, they are treated as teachers or spiritual allies. Shamans often speak about plants as if they possess intelligence or consciousness. According to these traditions, plants can communicate knowledge through visions, songs, and symbolic imagery. This might sound strange from a modern scientific perspective, but McKenna suggests that we should at least take these traditions seriously, rather than dismissing them immediately. Many of these cultures have interacted with these plants for hundreds or even thousands of years. Their understanding of these experiences developed through long traditions of experimentation and observation. McKenna also talks about how Western culture developed a strong bias against psychedelic knowledge. During the 20th century, many psychedelic substances were made illegal, and serious research into these compounds almost completely stopped for decades. As a result, a large amount of traditional knowledge about altered states of consciousness was effectively ignored or forgotten in mainstream scientific culture. However, McKenna believed that psychedelics might still hold important insights about the nature of the mind. He often suggested that the human brain may contain far more potential than our normal waking consciousness allows us to experience. Psychedelic plants might act like catalysts that temporarily unlock different modes of perception. One of the most interesting parts of this lecture is that McKenna doesn't present psychedelics simply as recreational substances. Instead, he frames them as tools that humans have historically used to explore consciousness itself. In that sense, they are closer to technologies of the mind than to ordinary drugs. Of course, many people disagree with McKenna's conclusions. Some scholars argue that spiritual traditions can develop completely independently of psychedelic substances. Meditation traditions like Buddhism and Hindu yoga have long histories of producing mystical experiences without any chemical substances involved. Others worry about the potential risks associated with powerful psychoactive compounds. But whether you agree with McKenna or not, his ideas raise an interesting question about the origins of human spirituality. Where did our first mystical experiences come from? Were they discovered through meditation and philosophy, or were they revealed through encounters with powerful plants growing in nature? McKenna believed that the relationship between humans and psychoactive plants may have played a crucial role in shaping early religious traditions. According to this view, some of humanity's earliest spiritual insights may have emerged from direct experiences with altered states of consciousness. What makes this lecture so compelling is that it encourages us to think about consciousness in a much broader way. Instead of seeing the mind as something fixed and stable, McKenna suggests that consciousness might actually exist across a wide spectrum of possible states. Ordinary waking awareness is only one small part of that spectrum. In the end, the ethnobotany of shamanism is less about promoting psychedelics and more about exploring how humans have historically tried to understand the mysteries of the mind. It's about curiosity, anthropology, and the possibility that nature itself may have played a role in the evolution of human consciousness. Whether you approach the topic from a scientific perspective, a philosophical perspective, or simply curiosity, McKenna's ideas invite us to reconsider the relationship between humans, plants, culture, and consciousness. And even if some of his ideas remain controversial, they certainly open the door to fascinating questions about how humans have explored the boundaries of their own minds throughout history.